Have you ever trusted someone so deeply that the thought of betrayal never even crossed your mind? I did. My name is Marcus Hale. I served 18 years in military logistics, calm under fire, trained to prepare for any disaster. But nothing prepared me for what happened when I woke up in a military hospital barely alive and checked my phone, a message from my wife. 4 words. I think I deserve this. Below it, a screenshot. Our joint account. Balance 0. Every cent, gone. While I was unconscious, recovering from a near-fatal accident during national duty, she had drained everything. My savings, the house equity, even my retirement contributions. She didn't think I'd survive. She was wrong. This story isn't about rage, it's about calculation, about quiet resolve, about turning betrayal into clarity and using the very system she tried to exploit against her. If you've ever been blindsided by someone you trusted or just want to see how calm, focused revenge can unfold, this is a story you won't want to miss. If this hits you in the chest, even just a little, like, comment and subscribe. And maybe share it with someone who thinks karma doesn't come with a court date. Let's begin. Before all of this, I was the kind of man people called dependable. My name is Marcus Hale. I was 42 years old when everything happened. At that point, I had already spent nearly 2 decades serving in military logistics. First, with the Air Force, later as a civilian contractor on federal response teams. I wasn't on the front lines, but I made sure the front lines had what they needed. Fuel, food, medical shipments. I moved the lifelines that kept the system breathing. It wasn't glamorous, but it was essential, and it gave me purpose. At home, I had a wife, Elena. We'd been married 12 years. No kids, by choice, mostly hers. She said the world was too unstable for children. I said, okay. I didn't fight it, I was always working anyway. FEMA deployments, hurricane seasons, wildfire runs. I was gone more than I was home, but when I was home, I did my best to show up. Fixed the fence, took her out to dinner, paid the bills on time, never cheated, never made her worry about money. I thought that was enough. We lived in a quiet suburb outside Richmond, Virginia. Mid-sized house with the mortgage half paid, a backyard she'd landscaped herself, and a kitchen remodel I financed the year before. Everything we had, we built piece by piece. I always assumed we were in it together, even if the connection between us wasn't what it used to be. I thought that was just what happened after a decade. Life gets busy, conversations get shorter, romance fades into routine. Still, I trusted her. Even when she started taking solo trips to Asheville or Charleston with her girls, women I'd never met. Even when she stopped asking when I'd be back from the field. Even when she changed the passwords to our shared accounts because she said she was reorganizing things for tax season. I brushed it off. After all, she never asked me for more. Never accused me of being absent. She just adapted. And so did I. That's the thing about being in logistics. You get used to solving problems before they happen, anticipating needs, staying ahead of the chaos, but you don't see the blind spots coming, the ones closest to you. If I'm honest, I was proud of the life we had. We weren't flashy. No designer vacations, no debt, just savings, stability. I had over $100,000 across multiple accounts, a solid pension path, and a home with equity. Everything was in place for a quiet, secure future. I never realized that the person I was building it with was already planning her exit. You don't hear the quiet unraveling until something snaps. And when it did, it wasn't a scream. It was 4 words in a text message, words that undid over a decade of commitment in a single moment. And it all started on the day I was deployed to help during one of the worst hurricanes to hit the Gulf Coast in 20 years. The storm was already tearing through southern Louisiana when we got the call. Category 4. Flash flooding, power grid failures, hospitals at capacity. FEMA had mobilized response units, and I was embedded with a logistics task force responsible for rerouting critical supplies, insulin, oxygen, portable generators, to shelters and trauma centers running on backup batteries. It wasn't the kind of deployment you say no to, not when people's lives are hanging in the balance. I was leading a convoy of 4 trucks through the outskirts of Baton Rouge. The roads were slick with oil and rain, and the sky looked like it was ready to split in half. We were on mile 67 of a 90-mile supply run when the accident happened. A utility truck lost control coming around a bend and jackknifed into our lead vehicle. We swerved to avoid impact, but our truck hydroplaned straight off the embankment and slammed into a culvert. The last thing I remember was the crack of metal and a blinding jolt in my chest. Then, darkness. When I came to, 2 days had passed. I was in a sterile, windowless room inside the military wing of a trauma center in Shreveport. Tubes in my arms, neck brace, bandages down my left side. A nurse looked up from her chart and smiled faintly when she saw my eyes open. "You're lucky," she said. "Collapsed lung, broken ribs, severe concussion, but you're going to make it." I blinked slowly, my thoughts still tangled in fog. The pain was there, sharp, constant, but beneath it, a deeper weight began to form. I reached for my phone with a shaky hand, more instinct than purpose. 78 missed messages, most from command, a few from old colleagues, and one from Elena. Just one. I opened it, a screenshot of our joint account. Balance, 0.0. Beneath it, her message. "I think I deserve this. You were never really here." There was no context, no emotion. Just a quiet, final sentence that hit harder than any impact I'd just survived. All our savings, the house equity, the emergency fund, gone. I lay there staring at the screen, my heart rate monitor steady despite what I was feeling, or wasn't. I wasn't angry yet. I wasn't even surprised. I was still. The kind of stillness that comes when your body is too broken to react. Maybe that's what betrayal feels like when it's delivered with such calm precision. It doesn't scream. It settles. I didn't reply with words. I tapped a thumbs up emoji and set the phone down on the tray beside me. Let her read into that whatever she wanted. The doctor came in an hour later. "No driving for 6 weeks, no lifting. Avoid all stress. Do you have someone picking you up when you're discharged?" "Yeah," I lied. "I've got someone. But I wasn't going home. Not to her. Not now. Not ever." They discharged me the next afternoon, just before sunset. The nurse offered to call a cab, but I told her my brother was outside. Another lie. I limped down the long hallway alone, every step a reminder of bones that weren't fully mended. Outside, the air felt heavier than it should have. The sky was clear, but inside everything felt clouded, hollow. I stood at the curb and called Nathan. We hadn't spoken much in the past year. Life had pulled us in different directions. He'd served as a JAG officer before leaving to start a nonprofit legal clinic for veterans. The kind of man who never needed much from anyone but always showed up when you did. "Need a place to lay low," I said. "You got it," he answered instantly. "Where are you?" An hour later, he picked me up in his dusty Chevy Suburban and drove me back to his house in Northern Virginia. His wife Rachel had made soup. His dog Moose barely looked up from the couch. Everything felt normal in a way that was almost cruel. I ate in silence, spoon clinking against the bowl, until Nathan sat down across from me and folded his arms. "So, Elena?" I nodded. "She knows you're out?" "She knows I'm alive. That's enough." I handed him my phone and showed him the screenshot. He studied it for a long moment, then shook his head. "You sure this isn't temporary? Maybe she panicked?" "She sold the house," I said quietly. "What?" "She didn't wait. She filed power of attorney documents, ones I never signed, closed accounts, transferred funds, gone." Nathan didn't speak for a while. Then he stood up, walked to his office, and returned with a legal pad. "All right. First, we document everything. Every account, every move she made. We pull public records, sale deeds, transaction dates. Then we figure out what's recoverable and what crosses into criminal." It still felt surreal. Just 2 weeks earlier, I was hauling cargo crates onto disaster recovery trucks. Now I was sitting on my brother's couch with a box of legal pads and a body that ached with every breath. But something in me had begun to shift. The fog was still there, but behind it, a thread of cold clarity was starting to form. I hadn't just lost money. I'd lost trust, stability, control. But I hadn't lost everything. Not yet. Nathan called his old colleague, Jessa, a forensic accountant who'd helped him in veteran cases before. She agreed to look into our finances. Meanwhile, I requested my full hospital records. If Elena had done what I suspected, filed power of attorney while I was unconscious, there might be more than betrayal at play. There might be fraud, and that changed everything. I didn't want revenge. I wanted the truth, and I wanted her to know that I wasn't broken. I was recovering, and I was coming. Jessa arrived the next morning with a laptop, a black coffee, and the kind of energy only someone who loves spreadsheets could radiate. She got to work at the kitchen table, quiet and focused, as I sat nearby, flipping through hospital discharge forms and trying not to let my bandaged ribs pull every time I breathed. Within an hour, she had pulled a full transaction history of our joint checking and savings accounts. The numbers told a story far uglier than I'd imagined. Transfers had begun nearly 6 months earlier. Small at first, $500 here, $2,000 there, always right after my deployment cycles began. Then they escalated. 5-figure wires to a bank I didn't recognize. A new credit line opened in Elena's name, with charges from furniture stores, boutique hotels, and a real estate firm in Alexandria. "What is this?" I asked, pointing at one cluster of charges. "Looks like a staging company," Jessa said. "They help sellers make homes look pristine for market photos. The timeline fits the house listing." She pulled up the sale record. Our home had been sold 2 weeks after my injury, listed a week after I'd been hospitalized. Elena had filed for expedited processing under the pretense of a financial emergency. She signed everything with her name and, shockingly, mine. "I never signed this," I said, staring at the digital signature. "You don't need to tell me that," Jessa said. "It's forged and sloppy." The document referenced a durable power of attorney, granted due to Marcus's incapacitation after a motor vehicle accident. The form was filed electronically. The witness signature was a name I didn't recognize, but the date matched, the day after my surgery. I was under sedation, medically incapacitated, and someone had claimed my voice as their own. Nathan stepped into the room, reading over Jessa's shoulder. "That's the legal leverage," he said. "Using forged documents while you're unconscious. If we prove that, we're not just talking about a divorce anymore. We're talking about criminal intent." "But it was a joint account," I said. "She technically had access." "Access doesn't mean license to drain it without your consent, especially if you were incapacitated and she was signing on your behalf. It crosses into financial exploitation. That's a different category of law." Jessa leaned back. "Also, if she filed a false POA, she likely filed false statements about your condition. Hospitals keep logs of patient status. If we pull those, we can match the timestamps. And the paper trail won't lie." I felt a pulse of something. Wasn't quite anger, wasn't adrenaline. It was closer to readiness. My breathing still hurt. My back ached. But inside, something had realigned. She hadn't just taken money. She had used my silence, my unconsciousness, as her window to vanish, and I wasn't going to let that slide. Nathan made a list. Request notarized sale records. Pull hospital status logs. Identify the bank where Elena wired the funds. Search for any new property purchases under her name. I added one more item. Find out who she did all this with, because no matter how calculating Elena had become, she hadn't done this alone. Not this fast, not this clean. Someone helped her move that money, sell that house, and vanish without so much as a confrontation. She was clever, I'd give her that. But now she'd forced me into the one position where I was most dangerous. Prepared, focused, and underestimated. 3 days later, the name surfaced. Leo Kramer. Jessa found him buried in a string of real estate filings linked to a property just outside of Charlottesville. An upscale cabin tucked behind a gated community. The name appeared not on the deed itself, but on a services invoice paid by Elena. Landscaping, pest control, and renovation costs. Nearly $40,000 in improvements, all billed to her new credit line. Jessa followed the trail further. There he was again, on a transfer of interest agreement. Leo Kramer listed as a business partner and development advisor. Development advisor? I asked. Nathan raised an eyebrow. He's a contractor, one who works exclusively with private sellers. Not exactly the kind of relationship you form casually. Jessa dug deeper. Social media gave us what bank records didn't. Pictures. Elena and Leo, together in Asheville, then in D.C., at an art gala, at a wine tasting in Fredericksburg. Each one carefully captioned to suggest coincidence, not intimacy. But the body language said otherwise. The last image had been posted a month before my accident, Leo's hand barely resting on her lower back as she leaned in, laughing. 12 years married, and I'd never seen her laugh like that. You think this was going on the whole time? I asked. Not at first, Nathan replied, but definitely long enough to plan everything she pulled off. You were out of town, and he stepped in. The cabin outside Charlottesville had been purchased in cash. The payment had come through a new account under Elena's name at a bank we hadn't used before, one that required in-person identity verification. The account was only 3 months old. The wire transfer matched exactly the date I went under, for surgery. She was liquidating while I was unconscious and finalizing her backup plan. They weren't just having an affair. They were building something. A life. A home. With my money. Jessa showed me one more detail. There's an email here. She forwarded a real estate proposal to Leo, and in it, she calls it, Our Sanctuary. Sent from her personal Gmail account. 1. She apparently never linked to any of your shared devices. How did you even find that? She used your name on the POA. It triggered a metadata search. Sloppy. I leaned back in Nathan's dining chair, staring up at the light fixture above the table. 12 years. And while I was charting inventory, routes, and preparing for disaster zones, she had been rehearsing for her own escape. She didn't just leave, I said. She replaced me. Nathan looked at me carefully. No. She tried to erase you. There's a difference. That night, I couldn't sleep. My body was still healing, but my mind was sprinting. Every quiet dinner we had, every time she said she was tired from work or just needed space, every unexplained withdrawal that I didn't question because trust had become a habit. But the betrayal wasn't just emotional. It was architectural. It was planned, thought through, professionally executed. This wasn't about falling out of love. This was a coordinated takedown, and what Elena and Leo didn't realize was that I had nothing left to lose. And a man with nothing left to lose is a man who finally starts asking the right questions. By the end of that week, the case file was over an inch thick. Nathan had organized it like a military dossier: transaction records, forged documents, hospital logs, metadata screenshots, photos of Elena and Leo, and a timeline that cross-referenced every financial move with my deployment history. We didn't have just a motive. We had intent, coordination, and a trail that couldn't be ignored. Nathan and Jessa both agreed. It was time to move. We filed for an emergency civil injunction in Fairfax County Court, citing financial exploitation during medical incapacitation and fraudulent transfer of marital assets. The judge, a stern woman named Wallace, agreed to freeze Elena's known accounts pending a full hearing. But the bigger goal was leverage. We wanted her off balance before she realized how close we were. Now we go quiet, Nathan said. She's going to get a lawyer. Let her guess what we know. In the meantime, I stayed with Nathan and Rachel, slowly regaining strength. My ribs still ached and sleep came in fragments, but every morning I woke up with more clarity. This wasn't just a divorce, it wasn't just revenge. It was about principle, about proving to myself and to the system that someone could take everything from you and still not win. I'd spent my career in logistics, solving problems under pressure. I'd built emergency distribution systems from scratch in flood zones and wildfire zones. So, I approached this like another mission. Step 1. Cut off the exit routes. Jessa flagged another account, one that hadn't shown up in the first search. A brokerage firm, small, boutique. It held over $28,000 in new investments under Elena's name, and one name kept reappearing in associated emails, Leo Kramer. This guy isn't just a fling, Jessa said. He's her co-conspirator. He helped structure the asset transfers. Some of the email attachments have his digital signature. Step 2. Prepare a counterattack. Nathan reached out to a litigation firm he'd worked with during his JAG years. One of their junior partners, Ava Tran, had experience in both family law and white-collar crime. She reviewed the file, then looked me in the eye. You've got a strong case. The forged POA alone could justify criminal charges depending on how the DA sees it. But if you want maximum impact, we don't rush. We collect. We freeze. We show. Up airtight. That's when I realized something. We weren't just responding. We were leading. Helena had made her move when I was unconscious, assuming I'd be too weak or disoriented to fight back. But what she didn't calculate was that I'd spent my entire life planning for chaos. Every form she'd signed was traceable. Every dollar she moved had a timestamp. And Leo, sloppy, arrogant Leo, had left a trail of fingerprints all over their new life. He wasn't her shield. He was her liability. Jessa said it best that night as we sat around Nathan's table, files spread out like a war room. They built this thing on the assumption you wouldn't survive. They counted you out. Now they have no idea how exposed they really are. And she was right. Elena hadn't just betrayed me. She'd underestimated me. And that was the last mistake she was going to make. 2 weeks later, I walked into the courthouse wearing the only suit I owned. It still smelled faintly of plastic from the garment bag. My ribs throbbed with every breath, but I stood tall. Elena was already inside, seated next to her attorney, Thomas Vance, a polished, overly confident type with the kind of haircut that made you question his sincerity. She didn't look at me when I entered. She just crossed her legs and whispered something into his ear. Ava Tran sat beside me, her expression composed, her case binder resting neatly on the polished wood table. On the other side, Judge Wallace called the court to order and reviewed our filings without commentary. She read fast, scanning each page like she was hunting for inconsistencies. When she finally looked up, her eyes landed squarely on Elena. "Mrs. Hale," she said, "can you confirm that the funds withdrawn from your joint accounts were transferred to private holdings while your husband was hospitalized following a federal deployment-related injury?" Elena shifted. "Yes, Your Honor, but those funds were marital property." "And did you notify Mr. Hale of these transfers?" "No, Your Honor." He was unable to respond. Wallace raised an eyebrow. "And did you file a power of attorney, granting yourself financial control?" "Yes." "Out of necessity." "Necessity," the judge repeated, opening another file. "According to hospital records, Mr. Hale was under sedation when this document was filed and could not have authorized its execution. The signature has been verified as a forgery by our forensic examiner." Vance cleared his throat. "Your Honor, our client was acting under emotional duress and had reason to believe her husband might not survive. She made decisions based on what she felt was in the best interest of maintaining stability." Ava didn't even flinch. She stood calmly, her voice clear and measured. "The problem, Your Honor, is not just the timing of the transfer. It's the orchestration, the sale of the home, the account opened with an unfamiliar financial institution, the wire transfers, and, most importantly, the involvement of a third party, Mr. Leo Kramer, who is not a member of this marriage but who has financially benefited from these actions." Judge Wallace looked at Elena again, this time with visible restraint. "Did you cohabitate with Mr. Kramer in a property purchased using funds transferred from the joint account?" Elena hesitated, then finally nodded. "Yes." That was the moment the courtroom shifted. You could feel it, the weight of the truth hanging in the air, undeniable. She hadn't just moved on. She had used my recovery bed as a springboard for a new life, funded by the man she left behind. Outside the courthouse, the media had already picked up the story. A local journalist had caught wind of the filing. Veteran's wife accused of financial exploitation while he recovered from service. Injury. The headline spread. Not viral, but fast enough to matter. Elena tried to speak with me afterward, but Ava blocked her path. All communication will go through counsel. We walked past her without another word, but I caught a glimpse, just a flash, of something in her face I hadn't seen in years. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't even regret. It was fear, because, for the first time, Elena realized the narrative she'd built was collapsing. She couldn't charm her way out, couldn't cry her way through. The law wasn't on her side anymore. And the man she thought she'd buried under hospital sheets had just taken the first step toward taking everything back. 3 months after that first hearing, I stood in what used to be our backyard, now overgrown with weeds and silence. The house still echoed with traces of a life I thought was built on trust. But something had shifted in me. The walls no longer felt like home. They felt like a reminder, not of loss, but of awakening. The court process unfolded quickly after the judge's initial ruling. Elena's attorney tried to delay the inevitable, but Ava stayed relentless. Every asset she and Leo had moved, every transaction they tried to hide, every bank statement they failed to disclose, it all became evidence. We didn't even need the smoking gun. The paper trail was damning enough. In the end, the judge ruled in my favor on almost every count. I was awarded full ownership of the house and the remainder of the investment accounts she hadn't already drained. Elena walked away with her car, her wardrobe, and the cabin in Charlottesville. Purchased, illegally, and now under IRS audit. Leo? He disappeared the week after our story made the news. Rumor had it he liquidated what was left of his assets and left the state. No formal charges stuck to him, at least not yet. Elena and I never spoke again. Everything went through the attorneys. The last message I ever received from her was a one-line email about splitting a hotel rewards account. I let her have it. I sold the house not long after the divorce was finalized. Too many memories tied to rooms I no longer recognized. I used the proceeds to buy a modest home closer to Nathan and Rachel. Something simple. Something mine. I sleep better there. No creaking floors, no staged furniture, no shadows moving behind closed doors. With Ava's help and Nathan's guidance, I started a small nonprofit, something I never expected to do. We called it Shieldline, a legal aid network for veterans navigating divorce, medical fraud, and financial abuse. The cases started slow, then faster. Turns out, I wasn't the only one. Jessa stayed on as our forensic analyst. I paid her from the settlement fund. She said it was the first job that ever made her feel like she was balancing the scales. I never tried to replace Elena. I wasn't looking for someone new. I was looking for quiet, for truth, for a way forward that didn't depend on blind trust, but on earned peace. And slowly, I found it. Sometimes I still think about those days in the hospital, the moment I woke up and saw that message on my phone, not with pain, but with clarity. Because that message didn't break me. It freed me. Elena thought she'd taken everything, but all she really did was burn down the version of myself that was too loyal for his own good. What I built afterward, that was mine, and this time, no one else gets the keys. What happened to Marcus Hale is not just a story of betrayal. It's a reminder that vulnerability doesn't make you weak. It makes you visible. And when someone chooses to exploit that visibility, especially in a time of health crisis, the impact goes deeper than any financial loss. It affects identity, dignity, and trust. In my work with veterans advocacy and legal recovery, I've seen a pattern. People who have spent their lives serving others often ignore the quiet erosion taking place at home. They take stability for granted. But silence can mask strategy, and trust, when taken for granted, can become a weapon. Marcus did what few have the strength to do. He responded with discipline, not destruction. He used the system the right way. He gathered information. He acted quietly. And when it mattered most, he let the truth speak louder than revenge. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is say nothing. Just walk with the truth and let it resonate. Leave a comment saying, no matter how broken it is, you can choose how it ends. If you've ever had to rebuild after someone you trusted damaged something you thought was unbreakable. And if this story resonates, please like, subscribe, or share with someone who needs to know.